On this episode of Project 380, I'm going to be finishing off the valve train. So I'm going to start off with the lifters, or buckets, whatever you like to call them. No special treatments or tools needed to install these. All you need to do is make sure they're really clean and put a little bit of assembly lube round where they sit and just push them in. And then the same with the valve shims, just make sure they're really clean, and then just a spot of assembly lube on top, but we may be removing these, and I'll tell you why in a little while. So now I'm ready to put the cams in. Now this is the exhaust cam. You can tell that as it's got a longer end because this is the Mark II head, and this is still the BP 4W, so that can go in with a little bit more assembly paste around the journals. But for the intake cam, I've managed to find a BP 5A cam from one of my old engines. I'm choosing this over the standard BP 4W cam as this has a couple of advantages. The old BP 4W had 0.326 inches of lift, whereas this one has 0.349 inches of lift. The old cam's duration was 248, whereas this is 251. Now this has been quite hard to research on the internet, as a lot of people have said a lot of different things, but there has been one person prove it where he's got 14 extra horsepower just from this alone. A lot of other people are producing 6 horsepower alone, but since I've got this laying about and it's going to add extra horsepower, it's going in this engine. Now it's time for the cam journals. Remember, these all have their own place and they must face the right way. In this case, the letters and numbers face with the engine. I've already put a little bit of assembly lube in the journal itself. Now on this last one, usually the seal would sit in here, but I may need to take this cam back out very shortly, so I'm leaving the seal out for now. And the same with the exhaust one, as I may need to take that out as well. On the exhaust, we're not putting in this back one, as this provides no structural strength to the cam itself. It's purely just to hold a seal. Now, I like to take my time tightening the cams down, as these have got a little bit of pressure on them on the lobes that are facing down, as when you're tightening them down you're actually pushing the valves down. So as you can see, I've just done everything a little bit by hand, and now I'm going to use a really small ratchet and work my way round and out just to pull it all down before I even think about getting the torque wrench out. Now, these have to be torqued down from 100 inch-pounds to 125 inch-pounds, and starting from the centre, spiralling out. I'm going to do this in 3 stages: 80 inch-pounds, 100 inch-pounds, and then 120 inch-pounds. So now what I'm going to do is put some old pulleys on, just so I can put these bolts in, so that I'm able to turn the cams over a couple of times to make sure all the valves seat properly and give everything a chance to be where it needs to be. So now you can just grab a spanner and turn it over 2 or 3 times by hand. Now that the lifters, shims and cams are in, we need to do our valve clearances. Now, you need to do this every time you grind or lap your valves in, or if you're changing a cam like I am. In this case, I've done both. By valve clearance, I'm talking about the distance between the cam lobe and the shim when there's no pressure on it. In other words, when the pointy part of the cam lobe is facing away from the spring assembly. Now, why do we need valve clearance? If you've got no clearance between the shim and the cam itself, sometimes the valve won't fully close, as there's always pressure on it, which will lose compression, power, and cause overlap, and it will seem like you've got a misfire. And when you've got too much gap when the cam spins round to where the spring assembly should not be touching it, there'll be such a gap that the spring assembly will bounce up and bounce back down, causing it to flutter. Now, on the intake cam side, I need an 8 to 9 valve clearance gap, and on the exhaust I need 12 to 13 valve gap. Fairly easy to work out. All you need is a set of feeler gauges. These are special ones to do the valve clearances, as they have a bend on the end, and a bit of paper and a pen to write down all your measurements. Now, Greg Peters, aka Miata Dad, has made this available on his website, thecarpassionchannel.com, for you to print out yourself to make this job even easier. So on this side we've got what lash you've already got, if any, for the intake and exhaust, so you can write all that down, and then a space this side to measure your shims. Now I'm going to start off on the exhaust side, so this is valve number 1. I'm now going to rotate the cam so that the pointy bit of the cam lobe is pointing up away from the valve assembly. Like so. So we'll start off with the 13 valve feeler gauge, which is the upper of my limit. And you can see that doesn't quite want to go in there. So we'll move down to the 12. That doesn't want to go in there either. Down to the 11, which slides in there nice and easy. So this gap is a little bit tighter than I want. So I'm writing on a bit of paper. $11,500. Just 15 more to do. So here are all my findings. On the exhaust side we were aiming for 12 to 13 thou. On cylinder 4 I'm good at 12 and 13. Cylinder 3 I'm a little bit loose at 15, 14. Cylinder 2, valve number 4, I'm a little bit tight at 11 thou. Valve 3 I'm fine at 13 thou, and then cylinder 1 I'm a little bit tight at 10 and 11. On the intake side, cylinder 4 and cylinder 3 absolutely fine at 8 and 9 thou. Cylinder 2, valve 4, we're a little bit tight at 7, but fine on valve 3 at 9. And again on cylinder 1 I'm a little bit tight at 7 thou. So I'm not sure whether I had a slight head issue where the front, something may have happened with heat and the back stayed fine, or the other way round. I was quite surprised putting in a new cam that these were so close together. Usually this isn't the case and you do have to shim them a lot more. So now hopefully my plan is maybe to move these shims from the exhaust cylinder 1 to exhaust cylinder 3 and 3 to 1, and hopefully that'll even out that gap. But for the others I may have to find new shims to get these right. So now the plan is to take the cams out, measure each individual shim, write them down and see whether I can swap them round rather than buying new shims. So to measure the shims we do need to remove the cams. I'm going to undo these in the same pattern that I torqued them down in, so you don't put uneven pressure on the cam. So to measure the shim, all we need to do is remove the shim from the lifter with a magnetic pickup tool. Sometimes that might stick a bit and you need to take the whole thing out and just pry them apart with a blunt screwdriver. Give it a little wipe down so there's no oil or assembly lube on it, and then using a micrometer place the shim in the micrometer. Use the ratchet on the end and then read the micrometer and write down what you found, and then place it back where you got it from, as to not get confused with any of the others. Now I'm only going to measure the ones I need to measure, as some of these are staying in the places where they are. So here are my findings. We'll start off with valve number 6 on the exhaust side, which I've measured 0.129 of an inch. The clearance we've got is 15 thou, which is 2 thou too sloppy for me. So we need to find a shim which is 2 thou thicker than this, which could be found on the intake side, valve number 1. So if I take that shim from there and put it here, that will bring this into tolerance, which actually rules out the problem I've got on valve number 4 on the intake side, which is 2 thou too tight. So we have to find a shim which is 2 thou smaller, which is found here. So I'm simply going to swap these two over, and that's going to solve two problems at once. Now the other shims I can move about, apart from 2, which I'm going to have to find 2 smaller shims for. So on exhaust valve 4, I'm 1 to 2 thou too tight with a shim of 0.134. So I'm going to find a shim which is 2 thou smaller, which is on the exhaust valve number 2. I'm going to swap that one over, but this one can't go here to replace this one, as it's 2 thou bigger and I'm already tight. So I will have to find a new shim for exhaust valve number 2. The same with the intake valve 1 and 2. I am tight on both, but with 2 different shims. So on intake valve number 1, we are 1 to 2 thou too tight with a shim of 0.130. If I swap these over, it will bring this down 1 thou to have a 0.8 clearance, but I can't put that one there as it will be too tight. So I also need to find a shim for here. So I'm going to take exhaust number 6 shim and intake number 4 and swap them around. Exhaust 5 and exhaust 1 and swap them around. I'm going to take exhaust number 4 and put that aside for now. Grab exhaust number 2 and put that in exhaust number 4, and take out intake number 1 and put that aside for now. Intake number 2 into intake number 1, which then leaves me with 2 where I need to find different shims for. Luckily I have kept some parts of my old engines, and I've found 2 that are 1.28 thick, and they could go straight in there. Now to lubricate everything back up and put it all back together and torque it down and test it again. The last thing I'm going to do today is the front cam seals. Now I'm not going to hit these in with a seal driver. I've found a lot better way to do this, and that is to just slightly undo the front camshaft caps, slide it in and re-torque them back down. Now I'm just going to put a very small bit of assembly paste just on the camshaft to help the seal slide over it. Then slide it in. Remember to watch out for the inside to make sure it doesn't fold out on itself. Make sure it's all the way home and retorque this back up. That's all for this episode. Join me next time where hopefully I'll be marrying up the head with the block. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave us a comment down below.